After all these years, I finally got an issue with the TS10. I'll explain it, try a fix, and I've also got an incredible offer to tell you about. Let's get started. The issue that I'm having is that this wing, the left wing here, doesn't always go down. In order to get it to go down, someone has to pull on it while I'm running the hydraulic valve. Then it will go down. So there's a bind in here. It took me a while to figure out what that binding was. I actually worked with Dave. Dave's not here today, but Dave and I worked a while to try to diagnose what was going on. And we finally figured out that the binding was not in the main hinge mechanism. That was my worst fear. I thought that I had done something serious to the mower, maybe hit a tree that was too big for it or something and bent something in the main hinge, but I couldn't see anything like that, and Dave and I figured out that was not the problem. The problem is actually in the PTO shaft. When the wing folds, the PTO shaft compresses. So as the wing is lowered, the PTO shaft extends. As it folds, it gets compressed more and more. And I could show that, I suppose, but I think I can explain it to you, and I don't have a tractor hooked to it right now because I wanted it here in the shop to work on. What the issue is that when I compress that shaft, it's actually binding in there. And I believe it's simply a matter of rust or, insufficient lubrication, I guess you could say. The situation is that I have kept it lubricated, and so I don't really know that I could do much more, well, at least with normal lubrication to solve this. I actually had this issue before, and the company replaced the shaft under warranty. And this new shaft has done it again, and I was very careful this time to make sure that I kept it lubricated. Well, the grease fitting is way out there on that end, but the bind is way back up here. So the location of the grease fitting was not getting the lube as far as it needs to go back here on the shaft. Perhaps I should have been unhooking the shaft and pulling it all the way out and making sure I was lubing the end, from the time it was new, but that never occurred to me, and so I didn't. I've heard of other people having this issue. I just asked a guy this week that owns a TS10 and has for several years, and he too has the issue where the wing doesn't want to go down. He hadn't tried to diagnose what it was, but I suspect it's the very same issue. I'm going to try a different solution here. Nothing to do with fixing the shaft itself. The way this folds, it's gravity down, right? We have one-way cylinders here. There's no pressure to push the wings down. There's only one hose running to the cylinder. I'm going to run the hose to the other end of the cylinder so that it becomes pressure down so that I can actually force them down. And hopefully I don't tear anything up by doing that, but that's what I'm going to try here. I'm going to be adding another hose just like this one. This one's going from the top port of the cylinder all the way down here, and there's a T right here. This one on the other side's doing the same thing. I'm going to be connecting to the bottom port on each cylinder, coming to the middle, have a T, and then a long hose that runs all the way to the tractor. These are 1/4-inch hoses, and it looks like it's pretty simple other than that. This is what we're going to be building. This goes into the port on the cylinder. This is an ORB 08 size thread. We'll talk a little more about threads in a minute. Then I'm going to have an elbow, then my hose end, the other hose end, here's the T, right? And here's the hose to the tractor. So this is laid out all the fittings that we need. Now one thing you'll see here is you talk about the cost of hoses when you have them custom made, and you say, well, hoses only a certain amount of dollars per foot. Why is it so expensive? Well, it's all these fittings that are where the cost is. The fittings are much more expensive than the hose itself. These crimpers are really flexible. You just put different dies in. It's a package of 8 dies, and they're actually magnetic. I put them in, and this die is 14 millimeter. I'm doing 1/4-inch hose here. It took me a little bit to understand how this works, but you don't have a die for every single size, but there's a micrometer on the outside here that you adjust to get the very detailed work, and I'll show you that in just a second. So DHH provides a chart here. So I'm using 1/4-inch hose, I'm using R16. It says I need to use the 14 millimeter die, which I just inserted, and it says the overall crimp diameter needs to be 15.6 millimeters. So I need 14 millimeters plus 1.6 millimeters. So on the micrometer here, I set it to 1.6. You have very detailed control on this. So it looks like in 2/100ths of a millimeter. Make sure I get my hose fitting all the way on. The way I do that is to measure it before I put it on and then make sure I'm able to push it that far. I'll insert it in here. I mentioned the multiple speeds. It goes really fast till it gets tight. So now that I'm close, I'm going to get it positioned here where I want it. Now, it's genuinely this easy, guys. I would like to try to convince you that there's some complexity to it, but that way I'd look like I was brilliant or something, but it really is this easy. And now that it's shifted to its lower gear, it's easy to pull. And then I just go until my light turns yellow. There it goes. Yellow light. It's got a little battery in it. And then, you know, I could have put the crimper up a little bit more and I wouldn't have that much of a bubble there. I don't know, it's up to you. You can see it's a perfect crimp here because it's tight around there, but yet the hose doesn't bulge. I could, just for the fun of it, crimp the next one just a little bit more to show you what I mean by that. A little bit won't hurt anything. Okay, I mentioned that I would tell you about a special deal. This is an incredible deal. Now, up front, I'm going to say it won't be for nearly all of you because it's going to be still a big investment. This is essentially the same deal that they offered to me when I started working with Discount Hydraulic Hose. So the opportunity is to get a free crimper with the purchase of a set amount of fittings. Hose, fittings, anything that you need to be able to use your crimper. There are 3 crimpers available. This one is what they call the manual, but it's pretty fancy for a manual because it's 2-speed. It's hydraulic operated, but you have to pump the hydraulic pump yourself. That's what they mean by manual. The next model up looks very similar, only it's driven by air, by compressed air, so you don't have to pump it yourself. Now, based on the amounts in this deal, that would be my recommendation. The next one up is even fancier, okay? It's called a UA-4. I don't know much about it. I'll just be honest, it's outside my league. Anytime you use one of these crimpers, you've got to have a lot of hose and fittings on hand just to be prepared for whatever you might need. So this deal is set up such that you buy fittings, hose ends, fittings, hose, whatever you might need, and then you get the free crimper. For this model, it's $5,500 worth of fittings and hose you buy. For the air compressed driven model, it's $6,000 worth of fittings, and then for the UA-4, it's $8,000 worth of fittings. I've got a yellow light. I'm gonna go one more pull just to show you what an extra crimp looks like if it's a little bit too tight. Well, even that wasn't bad, so I did not crimp it too tight. That looks really good. So you have to decide whether you like the looks of the bulge. This one I put a little further out. It didn't have any bulge. One more piece of equipment you'll need is some sort of a steel cutoff saw. The purist will tell you that you need a specific saw to cut this hose. I'm sure it would probably be better in some way. The commenters will let me know that. But I'm using a cheap Harbor Freight, steel cutoff saw, and it works fine. Use what you wish, and you can buy the nicer saws if you'd like. After this, I use an air compressor to blow out the stuff that's come in here. Again, there's a special air tool that you can swab through there to get all of the rubber out of there, but I think the air compressor does a great job. This is still a good bit of money, I recognize that. And I kind of questioned Discount Hydraulic Hose on this because this deal is really, really competitive. I mean, we're talking about a $4,000, $5,000 crimper, and I believe the other one's well more than that. Free with purchase of these fittings. They're already Discount Hydraulic Hose, right? I mean, these fittings are a lot less than what you can buy them at your local hydraulic shop. And so I don't think they're making any money on this. They may actually be losing a little bit of money on this sale. I asked them why they were doing it, and What they're trying to do is get some more of these crimpers out into the market, and then over time, they expect people to buy more fittings. That's how it works.
Just about the time I think the light's not going to come on.
The good news for us out here in the community is that if we can get some more of these crimpers out here, there'll be more people we can go to purchase hoses late at night or, you know, on the weekend when some of these other places aren't open. I think this is a good deal for larger landscapers, farmers. I don't think it's the right option for someone who owns a single 1025R, single subcompact tractor. That's not what I'm recommending at all. After all, discount hydraulic hose is fabulous for being able to get you a complete hose that's custom, just like you want it. Whatever length you want it, whatever fittings you want on the end, whatever threads, they are fabulous at handling that. And yeah, you won't understand exactly the threading likely, but if you'll work with them with some photos and stuff, they'll be able to get you the exact hose you need, and you can use code TTWT for that. So in that situation, I wouldn't do this investment. But if you're thinking that you might be able to make hoses for someone else, to make a little side gig, a little profit, or if you are in a situation where you find that you're down on the weekend without a hose, or that you could save a little time. That's what's happening for me. I'm finding that Dave and I are in here working on stuff, and with this machine and with the hoses and fittings that we have on hand, we're able to just to keep rolling. The only way you can get this deal is to go to this link. Now I'm going to put it on the screen here. You don't have to type it out. If you'll go to the description or go to the first pinned comment, we'll put the link there, but that's the only way you can get this deal. There is a special coupon code. I can't even remember it. It'll be listed here as well. And the details will be at this link as to how to get it configured properly to be able to get the free crimper. Rex made my hose spool holder here on an old pallet. I chose 1/4 inch, 3/8 inch, and 1/2 inch hose. If you're just getting started, in fact, if I were to do it over, I would consider going with 3/8 only. So the reason being that I rarely need 1/2 inch hose, at least for a cylinder. You don't need 1/2 inch hose. It doesn't take that much oil to expand and contract a cylinder, typical cylinder that we would use at least on small and regular ag-sized equipment. You do if you're in a main hydraulic system, but that's another story. The 1/4 inch hose is very nice, very flexible, but everywhere you use 1/4 inch hose, a 3/8 hose will work. So if you're trying to start as inexpensively as you can, just get a roll of 3/8 hose and the appropriate hose ends for that. And then you can, branch out as you go. The hardest thing about hydraulic hoses, whether you make them yourself or whether you have somebody else make them for you, is understanding the threads. There's several different type of threads, none of which work together. Okay, in order to convert from one thread to another, you have to get fittings that are adapters, and it's just understanding this is not crazy difficult, but you do have to take some time and maybe have some simple tools to help you with that. I'm going to show you a few thread types here today. Let me start with this one right here. This is a JIC, so you see the 37-degree taper here. Yeah, and you have to be able to tell that from 36. No, it's the only type that has a taper that looks like this. It's a 37-degree. This is the female version. So, for instance, both of these elbows are JIC on both ends. You can plug them together. For JIC, you do not need any thread sealant, nor does it take an O-ring. You just tighten these up good and tight, and they will seal. This is probably my favorite thread type because of the cost. So what you'll see from a lot of vendors is they will use JIC for the hoses themselves, right? And then they will, use whatever type of adapter fittings they need to do to get to their destination. So I've used JIC fittings on the end of most of these, and then an elbow here. So if you're buying hose ends, sometimes you don't need to buy the 90-degree or the 45-degree version. You can just use a straight JIC and then use a 90 or a 45 external fitting. And it's maybe even cheaper than buying the special hose end that has a 90 or a 45 built in. Now in this case, I'm going to show one of those adapters. This adapts from JIC to
ORB, O-ring boss. So in this case, there's an O-ring on here. This is a very good sealing thread type. This O-ring here is incredible. It does a great job. Of course, you do have the situation where an O-ring can go bad, but then this adapter here is going to screw right in here. We're going to take this O-ring boss and go directly into the cylinder. When you encounter a thread like this, how do you know? And not only do you see this, you say, oh, you know, Tim told me this is O-ring boss, so I get that. But what size is it? Well, that's where a tool like this can help a lot. So I can see that this one fits in this hole. This is made for JIC or O-ring boss, and I can see that it fits in this hole perfectly. So it is a 0.8 or 1/2 inch ORB. You can get these little plastic helpers from Discount Hydraulic Hose, and they also have online or in this little booklet form the measurements for a different thread type. So this, for instance, is a pipe thread that we're going to show in a minute, and they show the measurements. So in the next tool in your toolbox is a micrometer. So we'll look at this thread right here. This is a tapered thread, okay? And by tapered, we mean that the top of here is narrower than the bottom. And we can use a micrometer to measure that right at the top, and then we can compare that with the book here to see which size it is. And you can also use that micrometer to prove that it's tapered if you're having trouble visualizing it, right? You can actually see that it tapers in when you put a straight edge like a micrometer by it. This happens to be a NPTF, National Pipe Tapered Fuel. I don't know what the fuel means, but I needed it because my hydraulic coupler uses that type. I could put this directly on here, but it'll most likely leak. In order to use any sort of a tapered pipe thread, you have to put pipe solution on it. Some folks use Teflon tape. Other people just have a fit if you use Teflon tape. They say you're going to tear up your whole hydraulic system in your tractor. It's fascinating to me that almost every dealer uses Teflon tape, even though the YouTubers and forum folks say that it's the biggest evil ever. But if you don't want to use Teflon tape, you can just use some thread sealing compound, right? I'll go ahead and do that if I can get this open. It's pretty gooey stuff I've got here. Just spread it around the top of the threads here. Now with pipe thread, you have to tighten it tight. And the reason is because all it's got is that taper and that little bit of thread sealer to force the seal. So tightening it tighter and tighter and tighter pushes that taper, right, and squeezes that a little bit harder. So we will have to tighten that down tight here in just a second. So those are three major thread types: JIC, ORB, and NPTF, or pipe thread. Pipe thread's probably the cheapest, the most painful to work with. JIC is the best compromise of price, and ORB has probably a little better sealing capability. There's one or two more thread types that you might encounter. I'm not going to go into them here, but I would recommend getting this stuff from Discount Hydraulic Hose, these little plastic helpers, right? And that way you, and then this book, and that way when you call them to ask for a specific hose, you can be more knowledgeable about the threads that you're using. You can also send them a photo. If you say, hey, I think this is JIC 06, and here's a photo of it, they can say, no, that's not JIC, or yeah, that looks right to me. And we go on from there. So this upfront investment right here will save you a lot of money. What you'll find is if you're buying hoses locally, you'll pay probably at least double, maybe triple what you pay from Discount Hydraulic Hose. Of course, you can a lot of times get them that day instead of waiting 2 to 3 days for DHH to ship. We'll assemble all this and get ready to put it on the mower. Now, if you'll notice here, I've got the travel locks engaged here, so there is no pressure on this cylinder. The bottom port here is vented, and this is how a cylinder can be allowed to be one way. So there's only air on this side of the cylinder, never any pressure. This fitting that I'm taking out right now has an air vent right in it. If you have a little bit of a leak in the O-ring of your cylinder, the air vent will sometimes spew out some oil, and that's what you've seen here. So this one-way cylinder here has a little bit of a O-ring leak somewhere there, and so when I raise it all the way up, it spits out oil. Now I'm inserting my ORB to JIC adapter. This is an example of using adapters rather than using hose ends that would solve the problem perfectly, right? I could use a hose end that had a 90 in it and terminated in 0.8 or half-inch ORB, but that would be an incredibly expensive hose end, especially for quarter-inch hose. So using these adapters actually saves money, and it makes it so I don't have to stock as many parts. If you've stayed with me this long, you're probably somewhat interested, at least in the TS10. The TS10's primary configuration has only one hose that goes to the tractor, and it uses a series of restrictors and T's to prioritize the up and down raising of the mower, and then as soon as the mower gets all the way up, it automatically starts folding the wings with the same hydraulic circuit. I had mine configured a little bit differently. I wanted to use separate circuits for the wings as compared to the lift and lower. That's how I have mine configured already. So I had two hoses, and one of them, again, lift, and one of them for raising the wings, but we had gravity down on both of them. So what I'm doing is adding a second hose for the wings so that it's pressure down and pressure up. So now I'll have three hoses. I could get rid of this leak by making that a two-way cylinder and adding a fourth hose. There's really no disadvantage to that. I probably will do that at some point. There is a potential downside, not necessarily downside to having two-way cylinders, but in order for these wings to work properly, we really need a float valve on the tractor. And some of the tractors I run it on do not have float valves. The purpose of the float valve is to allow you for the wings to be able to go up and down as necessary based on the terrain. And without a float valve, pushing up on one wing is going to force the other wing down. You know, the oil has to go somewhere between the two. With a float valve, then it can go back into the tractor and both of them can do what they need to do. So I just try to manage that a little more manually if I don't have a float, and yeah, I need to work on that. I know a lot of you guys would like to see me mowing with this configuration. I'd like to see it too, but I can't figure out how to safely connect the PTO shaft. It's too close to the drawbar, and if I lower the drawbar anymore, the mower's going to be dragging. I just can't figure it out. I think I made this hose too long. It's tempting to make them too long, right? Because while you're making them, you think, hey, that other one's a little bit too short or whatever, but we can zip tie it into something back here and make it work. Now the left one over there is the one that binds, and now it pushes it on down. Now, of course, with a two-way cylinder powered, I could probably pick the middle up. That's the negative, right? Without a float. Well, problem at least partially solved. Yeah, I do need a float valve here instead of this electric DO3 valve. I gotta figure out how to solve that at some point. Meanwhile, I hope you guys have enjoyed this. This is something that's been bothering me and I needed to get done for a long time. Check out discounthydraulichose.com. Use code TTWT if you're just buying hoses. If you want that crimper deal, TTWT Crimper, I believe, is the promo, and you have to go to that specific link in the description to be able to get more details. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time on Tractor Time with Tim. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it.